my first assignment as a priest was at the largest parish in the diocese. And they had all these brand new facilities or recently renovated, and just a ton of resources and personnel. And the best part about all that is that I wasn't in charge, and it was just great. And then after 3 years, it's still at a tender young age, I moved to these 2 parishes in Toledo, which a lot of great folks there who I got blessed to know, but kind of like the exact opposite scenario. So no fancy new facilities, not the abundant resources. We had no money. I made a hobby out of pinching pennies, and it was all mine. So my first weekend there, my mom went and picked my grandma up in Monroe at the convent that she lived in, and brought her to the Saturday Mass, and then we went out to dinner, and afterwards I took Granny back to the mother house, and so we were in her room, and I was talking about all this, and of course my head is just spinning, and I'm relating all this to her, and just very sort of nonchalantly she said, "Well, who wouldn't like comfortable and easy?" That's always stuck with me, right? Who wouldn't like comfortable and easy? I do. But we know that's not life, and that's not the life that we're called to as Christian people. And I thought of that with all of our scriptures today that we have in the Mass. So that first reading from Genesis, we hear about Abram before he even becomes Abraham, and he's kind of settled, in his homestead with his clan, and back then especially your tribe, your land. I mean, that was your life. That's your identity. It was sort of all you knew, and really kind of all you ever wanted to know. But then God calls Abram, who is this time is 75 years old, and he says, "Go forth from all that you've ever known and loved, and I'll tell you when you get there." Of course, we hear he gives him a lot of promises that will make of him a great name, that he will make of him a great people, that all the families of the earth will be blessed in him, and all those things, of course, would come to be fulfilled, especially in the time of Christ. We know Abraham is an example. He's called our father in faith. He's known as a righteous man who is willing to step out in faith. So as we hear the last line of the first reading, Abram went as the Lord directed him. Couldn't have been comfortable and easy. I had no idea what was about to transpire in his life, but he stepped forward to answer the Lord's call for his life. Second reading, and Paul to Timothy, bear your share of hardship for the gospel. Didn't promise him comfortable and easy. That had been a hard word for Timothy to hear. He's probably doing his best. Bear your share of hardship for the gospel. And we can think of that too with our transfiguration account here in our gospel, that Peter, James, and John with the other disciples, they'd been going around with Jesus for around 3 years, and some highs and some lows. But there's that day that Jesus takes him up the mountain, and his glory as God, which he kind of kept under wraps, in a human form. He let them get a little glimpse of who he really was, right? And shone with all the glory he had of God, and Moses and Elijah were there, and it was quite this scene. And maybe they had to have been thinking this has got to be the pinnacle, what we've been sort of doing all this for. But then Jesus kind of tells them no, we got to go back down the mountain. We can't stay up here. Jesus had just told them about his upcoming passion. That probably wasn't registering too much, and he would tell them again. But he gave them that glimpse of who he was, so when they saw him arrested and scourged and crucified and buried, then of course risen, that that they would know who he was. But in those difficult times, when suffice it to say, it wouldn't have been comfortable and easy to see their Lord and Master Jesus go through a passion and death. But he was still with them, and that they could know his glory, and they could have courage to go through that difficult time. So it is with us as well. We who wouldn't mind comfortable and easy, but we know that in life, so many of the ways that we learn, that we grow, we mature, comes through the challenges and the changes and the hard times and all that. And looking back, we wouldn't be who we were without things not being comfortable and easy, at least some of the time. Of course, we know that our Christian life is meant to mirror the life of the cross. But knowing that the cross also brings new life, it brings resurrection. This is all through the grace of God. Of course, the Lord was with Abram as he continued along his journey. Of course, Jesus was with his disciples as they went through the rest of their lives. We heard St. Paul tell Timothy that it's not from his own doing, but the grace of God that is with him. And he reminds Timothy that he was called to live a holy life. To live a holy life is not comfortable and easy, but that willingness to conform our lives more and more to that of Christ. Giving up, letting go of what gets in the way of that, but knowing the grace, the strength, the power, everything that comes from the Lord. The season of Lent, too, is a time to remind us that the Christian life is not comfortable and easy. So if here on the second Sunday of Lent, we look back at the last week and a half and think Lent's been a little too comfortable and easy, then I don't know, maybe we're not quite taking advantage of the season like we should. I think even our little decorations up here remind us of that. It's funny, like on Ash Wednesday, I had at least 2 people ask me, is that vase supposed to be tipped over? Like we want it all like nice and organized, right? And it's a little unsettling for some, maybe more than others. And I asked our great decorators, I told them about that, and they're like, well, yeah, that's on purpose. You know, it's sort of meant to be like disruptive and not sort of comfortable and easy. It's a way of reminding us that life is just like that, and we need Jesus, who fills in every gap and who looks to bring us always to life when we step out in faith with him. And of course, here in the Mass, we come to the foot of the cross, knowing the grace and the power of Christ risen, crucified and risen. It's Lord who offers us a holy communion with himself and his life. A life that is not always comfortable and easy, but one that we know we walk with the Lord and he with us. So as we encounter Christ here in the Mass today, let's allow his presence to really be made known to us in and through our lives. That we know that he is with us on the way that leads to himself, to the fullness of his glory as God. That glory that he also does look to share with us.